Friends, before starting today's horror story, I would like to tell you a very interesting stat. 80% of our viewers who watch our stories haven't subscribed to our channel. And if you are one of them, you have to do a small task where you have to click to the subscribe button and also press the bell icon so that you are the first to get the notification as soon as our video arrives. Jim was a young guy who didn't have many friends and acquaintances in the real world. People at school didn't know who he was. But in the world of gaming, Jim was a force to be reckoned with. Known by the nickname Soul Eater 21, Jim was adored in the gaming world. His reputation was that of a silent yet lethal player who could take on anyone and emerge triumphant. It was believed that when Soul Eater 21 entered a game, a chill would run down the spines of other players. Despite his success in the virtual world, Jim was an introverted person in reality. He spent much of his time secluded in his room, headphones on, absorbed in his favorite activity. One of his favorite series was Resident Evil, the iconic zombie horror game that had gamers on the edge of their seats. So, when the next chapter of Resident Evil was out, Jim was one of the first to get a copy. He had been excitedly waiting for the new game and expected to play through the night, utterly engaged in the scary world that Resident Evil offered. The night Jim started installing the game, an odd thing happened. As he gazed out of his window, the weather outdoors drew his attention. The sky was covered with thick, heavy clouds, despite it not being the season for storms. The air was dense with the sensation of an approaching deluge. Jim shook it off, concentrating back on the screen as the game began installing. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. The installation procedure concluded with an odd noise that caught his attention. Without thinking, Jim selected play and was quickly thrown into the world of Resident Evil. He threw on his headphones, and the world around him evaporated as he immersed himself in the game. It was a traditional zombie apocalypse, Jim's character imprisoned in a house, surrounded by monsters who were following his every move. Despite the storm roaring outside and the rain beating against his windows, Jim was so immersed in the game that he didn't notice anything peculiar. Suddenly, while he was going through the dark hallways of the game, there was a flash of lightning, intense enough to make Jim flinch. But what was more surprising was that this bolt of lightning didn't impact his residence in any way. The lights didn't flicker, no appliances shut off. But something felt odd. The next thing Jim understood was that his entire body was being sucked into the game. He wasn't sitting in his room anymore. Instead, Jim opened his eyes to find himself sleeping in a poorly lit, cramped chamber. The walls appeared ancient and weathered, and the door outside was being hammered on brutally. Panicked, Jim realized that he was no longer playing the game. He was within it. It was genuine. The apartment smelt musty and wet, and Jim could hear the shrill, ugly sound of someone, or something, scraping at the door. A startling insight hit him. This was the very same home from the game. As Jim slowly approached the door, his pulse raced. His breath froze in his throat as he glanced through the breach in the door. The scene that awaited him was horrifying. The creatures standing on the other side were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Deformed, ugly animals, their skin ripped and wounded. These weren't just ordinary creatures. These were the zombies from the game that he used to play so much. And they were trying to break into the room where Jim was hiding. With a fog in his mind, Jim began to wonder if this was really a nightmare. He had played Resident Evil numerous times, but this seemed too real. Just then, a skeletal hand lunged through the breach in the door, gripping Jim's throat with a sickening, bone-crushing grasp. He yelled, straining to free himself, and with a great effort, he eventually broke free. The understanding was like a blow to the gut, and now he had realized that he wasn't dreaming. This seemed real. Jim's throat felt parched, and his mind raced as he examined the room for any clues of escape. The odd, zombie-like beings were still trying to smash down the door. There was a moment of fear. Jim went into the neighboring washroom that was in the room itself and locked himself there. The door thudded as the zombies banged on it, and it seemed as if they were coming closer to him. Jim's thoughts raced. This was too familiar. He had witnessed this exact situation in the game, the house, the zombies, the gloomy atmosphere. It was all just like the game he had been playing earlier. He remembered the beginning place of the game, the very same home where he was lying. A startling notion hit him. Could it be? Was he actually within the game? His pulse raced as he began to scour the restroom for anything that could help him live. His fingertips brushed over the flush tank of the toilet, and to his horror, he discovered a gun hidden inside it, just like in the game. He felt his hands shiver as he clutched the firearm. His fingers felt weak, his heart thudding in his ears as he comprehended the enormity of the situation. This was This was no longer simply a game. He was now a part of it. With the revolver in hand, Jim gently approached the door, attempting to control his breath. He could hear the zombies gathering outside, their screams increasing louder. He had no option. The gas cylinder in the middle of the room was an ideal target. With shaking hands, Jim aimed through the opening in the door and shot. The explosion was terrible. Jim went a little backward, the blast throwing him off balance. The home was in disarray, but he didn't pause to glance back. He raced out of the room, rushing down the dark halls as fast as he could. The odor of burning wood and ruin permeated the air. It felt like an age, but ultimately, Jim stormed through the front door and into the darkness. He found himself in a city now, a city hauntingly deserted, abandoned, and silent. The same menacing dark clouds hung low over the sky, and the air was chilly and harsh. It seemed as though the planet itself had perished. Jim went aimlessly through the streets, the pistol still in his grasp, hoping for a sign of life. Then, in the distance, he heard a quiet, sorrowful cry resonate from an alleyway. Jim followed the sound and discovered a tiny child sitting in the corner, her head between her legs. She glanced up at him, and in a frantic, broken voice, she told him her story. Her family had been killed by the zombies, and her parents had been slain. The girl hugged Jim, wailing hysterically, and in that moment, Jim felt a flood of pity. But as he looked down at his right palm, he observed something horrifying. There was blood on it, but that wasn't his blood. It was hers. Jim dragged the girl away, his heart beating in his chest. "Were you bitten?" he asked. The girl didn't answer, but instead pushed her hair back, showing a deep white wound on her neck. It was the mark of a zombie bite. Jim went a little back with amazement, and before his very eyes, the girl began to change. Her complexion went pale, her eyes got bloodshot, and her bones shattered as they twisted and deformed. She was morphing into a zombie right before his eyes. With dread, Jim recognized what was happening. The girl's body was no longer human. She was a monster, and she was coming for him. But Jim's pistol had no rounds left. Will Jim escape this nightmare? Will he escape the frightening realm of Resident Evil? Or will he be confined forever? Find out in part 2 of this story. If you like the story, then do subscribe to our channel, Bloody Monday, and keep watching for more such spine-chilling horror videos. Please do share the videos with your friends and family so that we could get motivation for uploading more of such spooky videos. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of our eerie, heart-pounding videos. Keep watching and stay brave.